Hello, viewers. Once again, it's me, Ewaenruwa Nomaren, and this is my channel, It Pays to Fear God. This is where we learn about God, His beloved Son, Jesus Christ, and their kingdom purpose, the three most important subjects that we can ever learn about, talk about, or discuss in the entire Holy Bible, according to John chapter 17, verse 3. The subject that I have prepared for you and myself today is captioned "In Search of the Man of God." However, before I get into that, we are once again going to hear a tune that some of us might enjoy. And while that tune is playing, you can go ahead and subscribe and also click the notification bell to be notified when we make our next videos. Once again, the subject that I have prepared for you and myself today is captioned "In Search of the Man of God." Being a man of God is a very popular topic among Christians, as of course, pastors or prophets are men of God, and they are generally looked up to. They are the leaders of the children of God. However, Jesus Christ and other people in the Bible have told us that there would be many false ones roaming around in the world, false prophets, false Christs, antichrists, etc. If we read Matthew chapter 7 from verses 15 to 24, chapter 24 from verses 5, 11, and 24, and 1 John chapter 4 verse 1, and even 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 21. Such people wouldn't be telling us to check what we hear if there wouldn't be people teaching lies. However, how do we exactly know when somebody is a false prophet and when somebody is teaching the truth? How do we differentiate between somebody who wants to preach for our benefit or somebody who just wants to preach for their own personal selfish gains? Well, I'm going to be reviewing some of those things in this video. Starting off with, humility and love is a character or characters of a true prophet. Jesus Christ had continuously criticized the Pharisees, called them hypocrites, etc., because they didn't really love their flock. In fact, he even said in Matthew chapter 23, verse 15, that when they bring somebody in and that person is schooled by them, they end up becoming worse in the end than they were when they came in. And why is that? They didn't really talk about the things that God really wanted, being mercy and the knowledge of God. If we read Hosea chapter 6 verse 6 and 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 22. They would rather teach tithes, offerings, things that would glorify themselves, and not only that, they would never give the things that would actually make people closer to God because they just didn't feel like those things were that important. And in Matthew chapter 23 verse 23, Jesus Christ condemned them considering such things because they should not just focus on tithing mint and leaves, but they should focus on love, faith, etc. Things that they themselves didn't have. And they were also deprived the people that they would teach and rule over from having such things as well. Jesus Christ, on the other hand, was a completely different pastor or shepherd or man of God, because he did not give people stuff that would just respect himself. He would give people things at his own expense that would benefit themselves, specifically in God's relationships. Because in John chapter 10, from verses 1 to 18, Jesus Christ called himself a good shepherd that would even die for his flock. He would talk about faith. He would talk about love. He would talk about charity. Even talking about how people should give in Luke chapter 21 from verses 1 to 4, where there was a rich man who gave a lot of stuff, lots of very valuable gifts, and then there was this widow who just gave something little. The Pharisees would have been like, come on, this guy gave so much things. We should accept this, because of course they just like the value. But Jesus Christ preferred the offering of the widow, because as that story states, the woman gave almost everything that she had. She gave a much bigger percentage of what she herself had than what those rich men were giving compared to the total amount of the stuff that they had. That is what it means to be a good shepherd. Moses wasn't different, because if we read Numbers chapter 12 verse 3, he was considered the meekest man on the earth. And if you read the book of Deuteronomy, he didn't just talk about tithes and offerings and stuff. He talked about loving God, fearing God, obeying God, especially the loving part, because he himself had a very good idea of what God did for them in the land of Egypt, which is why he continuously told the Israelites, don't mess up because of what God had done. Then another thing is lust, especially having a taste for worldly things, which is really where most pastors in this world are. A true pastor or shepherd or man of God or prophet will not be lured away by the things of this world. And this was talked about in 2 Kings chapter 5 from verses 20 to 27, where Elisha had dismissed the gift that Naaman the leper, who was not a leper anymore, being healed, had brought to him, as sort of being grateful for what had happened to him. But Gehazi, who, even though being a disciple of Elisha, would have probably known that money is not it, being loyal to God is better and stuff, he still went after Naaman, collected some gifts, and then hid them, and then came to Elisha and said, I don't have anything. But then Elisha cursed him with leprosy because of his lusts and his tastes for money and gifts, etc. False pastors in this world, it might not just be money. Some pastors, they run after women. Some pastors, they run after filthy lucre. Read Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 23. Whatever thing it is, the love of money, especially in the sense of a pastor, is not good. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. That's 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. And in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 14, the whole chapter of 2 Peter chapter 2 is about the idea of lust, the idea of false pastors and what they go after and stuff. But specifically in verse 14, St. Peter had stated, having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, and heart they have exercised with covetous practices, cursed children. And if you read verses 15 and 16, he used the story of Balaam to demonstrate this. And the reason why St. Peter did, it was because Balaam in Numbers chapter 22 was a known wise person of God. It was kind of like Jesus or like Elijah or like Job, who were full of the wisdom of God. Especially if you read Job and Jesus, you can see the kind of wisdom that they demonstrated against the people that were not in support of them. We see that Balaam had, even though having all the wisdom that Israel was a blessed nation of God and stuff, had still went having the heart intention to curse the people of Israel. And that was where the story of the donkey seeing the angel of the Lord and doing the opposite and all the other stuff that happened. It was because of the fact that Balaam, though having an extensive knowledge of the Bible and generally of what God wanted at the time, because of the gifts that the king of Moab, the rewards that were going to be given to him, he decided to go curse Israel. But eventually he changed his mind after what happened. He went to go bless them. But the idea of filthy lucre should never drive a true pastor to go do the raw thing. It's only fake pastors that will go in such things. And a part of this is another thing that false pastors do, and that is taking bribes. But then some of you guys might say, wait, no, my pastor doesn't take bribes. But bribes doesn't just mean money, because bribes, as a physical definition kind of thing, is simply you wanting favor from somebody and then you give something, whichever thing it is, but it's wanting favor and giving something for it. It's like kind of a illegal exchange. And pastors do this with Satan the devil. This doesn't mean that they have a direct conversation with Satan the devil, but it means Satan the devil is the one selling the bribes by saying, if you teach lies to people, if you deceive people, Isaiah chapter 9 verse 16, for the leaders of this people cause them to err, and they that are led of them are destroyed. If you join in that category, you'll be rich, you'll have fame, you'll be able to ride expensive vehicles, private jets, etc. And because fake pastors have lusts, Satan the devil is essentially saying, I will give you such things. And remember, it's the same thing that he did in the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3 from verses 1 to 6. It was a bribe that he sold to Adam and Eve for freedom and stuff like that. And pastors who accept that they go teach lies to people and they get extensively rich and stuff, that is a fake pastor right there. And in Psalm chapter 26 and verses 9 and 10, David the psalmist, praying to God to not have anything to do with such people, had stated, gather not my soul with sinners, nor my life with bloody men, in whose hands is mischief, and their right hand is full of bribes. If you also read the sons of Eli in 1 Samuel chapter 8 verse 3, they were people who were supposed to be judging Israel righteously, if read 2 Samuel chapter 22 verse 2, but instead they were taking bribes, running after filthy lucre, etc. Another example or character trait that will differentiate between a fake pastor and a true one is being courageous, because St. Paul, for example, would always tell the people, especially the individual ones that would become soldiers for God, like Timothy and Titus and Philemon and the others, that you have to be a good soldier for God. For example, in 2 Timothy chapter 2, from verses 3 to 5. Not like Jonah, who ran away from the witnessing that God told him to do against the people of Nineveh in Jonah chapter 1 verse 2. Instead of doing it, he ran away and boarded a ship to go somewhere else and stuff. We have to be courageous. It was the same way Joshua and Caleb were in Numbers chapter 14 from verses 6 to 9, showing enthusiasm, true enthusiasm to dispense the message and be loyal, like I discussed before, and strong before God. They were supporting the people going to Canaan, while the other 10 were afraid and were bearing the other witness of, oh, we are too weak and stuff like that. St. Paul took courage to go to Rome in Acts chapter 28 verse 15. And in Romans chapter 1 verse 16, St. Paul, boasting about the kind of courage that he himself, a true man of God, had stated, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to every one that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. If read Galatians chapter 6 verse 12, St. Paul, talking about the opposite, which the people of Galatia and the others were doing, preaching circumcision, had stated, as many as desire to make a fair shew in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised, only lest they should suffer persecution for the cross of Christ. Another attribute that true pastors, true shepherds have from fake ones is loyalty. They are loyal to God. You are only going to support one given party. And false pastors don't exactly do this. Jeremiah, for example, who of course we now know is of course a true prophet of God, in Jeremiah chapter 42 from verses 1 to 22, for example, had decided to tell the people what God wanted because he was loyal to God. Remember, these people could have done anything with the prophets. They could stone them, they could beat them, they could kill them, etc. And Jeremiah, because of what he told them and the rebellion of the Israelites, he ended up having to go to Egypt when he wouldn't have really wanted to go there, because that's not what God wanted. A false pastor, after analyzing the situation, would have just said, oh, let me just go tell the Israelites, no, Egypt is a fantastic land and stuff, because they are afraid of what the people would do. But Jeremiah was not afraid. He was loyal to God, and that was why he told them, do not go to Egypt, because if you do, God is going to come after you by destroying that place that you want to go, so that you will have nowhere to run to. It's very important that we understand being loyal is something that a true pastor must have. And in Romans chapter 16 verse 18, St. Paul had stated, for they that are such serve not our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and with good words and fair speeches deceive the hearts of the simple. They don't want to teach things. They don't want to be loyal to God by telling people stuff that will benefit them, warning people if possible, condemning whatever. No, they just want to tell you the good stuff. They listen to the requests of people instead of the requests of God. And those requests were talked about in Isaiah chapter 30 verse 10, which states, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things. Speak unto us smooth things. Prophesy deceits. That is the request that people who are ignorant make. And instead of the pastors being loyal to God and telling them what God himself would want them to tell them, they prefer to tell them supporting stuff that would maybe make them feel better. They want to be a good instrument before the people. If we read Ezekiel chapter 33 from verses 30 to 33. A true pastor is loyal to God, whereas false pastors aren't. Another thing that a true prophet of God does is to bear witness. Similar to my talk on being courageous and stuff, a false pastor will want to be kind, speak peace to everybody. If we read that 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 3, Jeremiah chapter 23 from verses 16 to 20. But the idea is that a true pastor will be condemning iniquity and commending righteousness. And there are examples in the Bible of people who did so and people who didn't. Micaiah was not afraid to testify against the kings that had requested for his answer from the Lord in 1 Kings chapter 22, because he was loyal and he was ready to be a judge, because a priest or a prophet is a judge. A false pastor, though, will decide to just be supportive, just say, yes, this is God's will of, yes, you guys are righteous, God loves you, by grace are you saved, as last days doctrines are. But in reality, those things are not necessarily so. And those doctrines were described in Ezekiel chapter 13 from verses 1 to 6 and many other places all over the Bible. Nathan the prophet in 2 Samuel chapter 12 was an example of a true prophet. Because remember, he was testifying against King David. King David could ask for the head of anybody. He could have just asked for the head of Nathan the prophet. And Nathan the prophet would have probably known this, but he still went to him and gave him that parable of the rich man versus the poor man and the sheep to help David understand that because you committed adultery, God is going to require an account. He's going to do some things to you. And he was not afraid to utter such statements. And a true pastor of God is supposed to be under Jesus Christ, the head of the church, if we Colossians chapter 1 verse 18, and 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3, and Ephesians chapter 5 verse 23, and not be afraid to say what Jesus Christ himself wants them to say. I hope this is understood by all of you viewers. There are many more things that can be said to help differentiate between a true pastor and a fake pastor, but I believe that the things that I have said in this video are enough to help understand this. These things were summarized, everything that I've said, in Isaiah chapter 33 in verses 15 and 16. The qualities of a true pastor and the other side being a fake pastor. Where Isaiah the prophet had stated, he that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gains of oppressions, that shaketh his hands from holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood, that shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. He shall dwell on high, his place of defense shall be the minister of rocks. Bread shall be given him, his waters shall be sure. In Deuteronomy chapter 13 from verses 1 to 18, Moses was commanded by God to go tell the Israelites that when you see a person, whether it's your wife, it's your son, or whoever it is that is speaking false witness, that person would be stoned to death. It doesn't matter who it is, that person would have to die because he's bearing false witness, whether it is God has cursed Israel or whatever false witness it is. If we see a true pastor, though, we should follow Hebrews chapter 13 in verses 7 and 17. Bless him. Give him a cup of cold water. If read Matthew chapter 10 verse 42, which isn't physical support, help. You pray for the person, you bless the person, etc. You give that to him because he's a true prophet. And I choose to talk no further on the subject, in search of the man of God. To conclude this episode, we are once again going to hear a tune that some of us might enjoy. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something most importantly. Please try to subscribe, share this video, and click the notification bell if you haven't already to be notified when we make our next videos. Thank you for listening.